August 4th, 1914, 11 p.m. Dover, England. As Britain's ultimatum to Germany expired and war became official, a small paddle steamer named CS Alert slipped quietly out of Dover Harbor into the darkness of the English Channel. Her crew had no Royal Navy escort, no destroyers to protect them, no warships to guard against German attack. But Alert carried something far more powerful than guns. She carried grappling hooks, steel claws designed to drag the ocean floor and snag submarine telegraph cables. Within the next 24 hours, this unremarkable ship would execute one of the most brilliant offensive operations of the entire war. A mission so effective that Germany would spend the next 4 years trying to recover from it. Britain was about to cut Germany off from the world, not with blockades, not with battleships, but by severing 5 underwater cables thinner than your arm, buried beneath hundreds of feet of seawater in the English Channel. And the Germans had absolutely no idea it was happening.
To understand why cutting a few cables mattered so much, you need to understand the communication network that ruled the world in 1914. It was called the All-Red Line, and Britain controlled it completely. By August 1914, the British Empire operated over 100,000 miles of underwater telegraph cables spanning every ocean on Earth. These cables connected London to India, Australia to Canada, South Africa to Singapore. Every major port, every colonial outpost, every strategic location was linked by British-owned copper wires lying on the seabed. Maps of the era showed this network in red, following the tradition of coloring British territories red on political maps, hence the name, All-Red Line. This wasn't just communication infrastructure, it was power, absolute, invisible power. When a businessman in New York wanted to send a message to Tokyo, it traveled through British cables. When diplomats in Buenos Aires communicated with Berlin, British telegraph operators handled the transmission. Britain didn't just move messages, they could read them, delay them, or make them disappear entirely. Germany understood this vulnerability. They'd spent years trying to build their own cable network to escape British control. By 1914, Germany operated 5 major submarine cables running from the coastal town of Emden through the English Channel to France, Spain, the Azores, and beyond to Africa and the Americas. But there was a fatal flaw in the German system. Every single one of their transatlantic cables had to pass through the narrow English Channel, and in 1914, Britain controlled both sides of that waterway. But what the Germans didn't realize was just how quickly Britain could strike. The operation had been planned for years. The moment war became inevitable, the British General Post Office activated their secret contingency plan. They would use their own cable-laying ships, normally used for peaceful repairs and installations, as weapons of information warfare. The target wasn't soldiers or ships. It was something far more valuable – Germany's ability to communicate securely with the outside world.
CS Alert was never designed to be a warship. She was a telegraph maintenance vessel. Built in 1871 by A. Macmillan & Son in Dumbarton, Scotland, Alert was originally named the Lady Carmichael, after the chairman's wife of the Submarine Telegraph Company. She measured just 167 feet long with a 25-foot beam. Her displacement was 760 tons, making her smaller than many fishing trawlers. She was powered by twin paddle wheels, an old-fashioned design even in 1914. But those paddles gave Alert capabilities that propeller-driven ships couldn't match. She could turn on the spot by counter-rotating her twin paddles. She could stop almost instantly by reversing them. She could move backward just as fast as she moved forward. And with a draft of only 10 feet, she could work in shallow coastal waters where larger ships couldn't operate. Alert's real weapon wasn't her hull. It was the equipment mounted on her bow. Cable handling gear designed by W.B. Essen and built by Tom's Iron Works sat at the front of the ship. A massive winch capable of pulling 10 tons at 1 knot of speed. A cable sheave mounted on a boom that could swing out over the water. Steam-powered machinery that could raise cables from the ocean floor with precision that took years to master. The most critical tool was the grapple. A multi-pronged steel hook weighing several hundred pounds, attached to strong hemp rope or steel wire. The grapple was dragged along the seabed until it snagged a cable. Once hooked, the winch would slowly raise the cable to the surface. The technique sounds simple. It wasn't. Telegraph cables in 1914 weren't uniform. Near shore, they were heavily armored with multiple layers of steel wire to protect against damage from ship anchors and fishing nets. These shore-end cables could be 3 inches thick and weigh several tons per mile. Further offshore, in deeper water, cables were lighter and less protected to reduce cost and weight. Grappling required knowing exactly where a cable lay on the seabed. Charts showed the routes, but cables could shift over time due to currents and underwater geology. You dragged the grapple back and forth across the suspected route until you felt the distinctive resistance of a cable catching on the hooks. Then came the delicate part. Raising the cable too quickly could break it before you reached the surface. Raising it too slowly gave the enemy time to detect your operation and send warships to stop you. Alert's crew were specialists. Many had spent their entire careers laying and repairing submarine cables. They knew the feel of a grapple catching. They understood the strain limits of different cable types. They could work in darkness, in rough seas, with the precision of surgeons. But the real challenge wasn't technical. It was strategic. Superintendent Bordeaux stood on Alert's deck that night as the ship left Dover. He was the only person aboard who knew the full mission objective. His orders were explicit. Cut 5 specific German cables in the English Channel before dawn. Don't cut British cables by mistake. Don't get captured by German warships. And above all, don't fail. The cables ran from Emden, Germany, through the Channel to multiple destinations. One cable connected to Vigo, Spain. Another reached Tenerife in the Canary Islands. A third linked to the Azores. 2 more ran to African destinations. All 5 had to be severed to isolate Germany from direct telegraph communication with the Americas and Africa.
Alert reached the location of the first cable around midnight. The weather was deteriorating. Waves in the channel were building, making the ship pitch and roll. Darkness was absolute. No lights could be shown that might attract German attention. The crew deployed the grapple. The steam winch groaned as it paid out line, lowering the heavy steel hook toward the seabed 200 feet below. Once it reached bottom, Alert began moving slowly forward, dragging the grapple behind. Minutes passed. Then the distinctive jerk of a cable catching on the grapple's prongs. The winch reversed. Slowly, carefully, the cable began rising from the depths. The crew worked in near silence, knowing that any mistake could cost them the mission. As the cable broke the surface, seawater streaming from its armored exterior, sailors rushed to secure it with rope stoppers. This was one of the most dangerous jobs on the ship. Men balanced on narrow footboards along Alert's sides, prevented from falling into the Black Sea only by a line tied under their arms. They wrestled the heavy cable, securing it so the cutting crew could move in. The cutting tool was simple but effective. A large bolt cutter for the lighter sections, a hacksaw for the heavily armored portions. The cable to Spain took several minutes to cut through. When the final strand parted, both ends dropped back into the channel with a splash.
separating forever. 1 down, 4 to go. Alert moved to the next target location. Again the grapple deployed, again the patient dragging across the seabed. The cable to Tenerife was found and cut, then the Azores cable. By 3 a.m., 3 German cables lay severed on the channel floor. However, the biggest challenge was still ahead. The weather was worsening rapidly. Winds increased, waves grew higher. Alert's paddle wheels fought to hold position against the current. The crew was exhausted, but 2 critical cables remained, the connections to Africa that Germany needed to communicate with its colonies. The 4th cable proved difficult to locate. Alert made multiple passes with the grapple, finding nothing. Bordeaux checked his charts again. The cable route should be right beneath them, but the grapple came up empty pass after pass. Finally, on the 7th attempt, the distinctive resistance. The cable was deeper than expected, requiring more time to winch to the surface. When it finally appeared, the crew could see why it had been so hard to find. Underwater currents had partially buried it in sediment. They cut it anyway. 4 down, 1 remaining. By now, dawn was approaching. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east. Alert was running out of darkness, running out of time. If German patrol ships spotted them now, there would be no escape. A paddle steamer couldn't outrun modern destroyers. But Bordeaux made the call: complete the mission. Alert moved to the final cable location. The grapple went down one more time. And here, disaster nearly struck. The rough seas and exhausted crew made mistakes. Grapples broke under strain. 3 of them were lost, damaged beyond use, dropped back into the channel. Alert's supply of grappling hooks was nearly exhausted. With one of their last remaining grapples, they made a final attempt and caught the cable. The winch strained. The cable rose. The crew cut through it as fast as their exhausted arms could work. Just as the final strand parted, lookouts spotted ships on the horizon, a flotilla of destroyers approaching fast. The crew braced for combat. Alert had no weapons, no armor, no chance of survival if the destroyers were German. But what they didn't know was that fortune had favored them one final time. The destroyers were French, not German. When the French captain interrogated Alert about her activities and learned she'd been cutting German communications cables, his crew raised a cheer. France and Britain were now allies against Germany. The mission was complete.
Within 24 hours of Britain declaring war on Germany, the German Empire was communicating blind. All 5 transatlantic cables through the English Channel were cut. Separate British operations around the world simultaneously severed other German cables, the link between Liberia and Brazil, the connection from the Azores to New York. Every German-owned submarine cable that reached beyond Europe was either cut or tapped by British intelligence. Germany's only remaining option for secure long-distance communication was wireless radio, and that created a catastrophic vulnerability. The German naval station at Nauen, just outside Berlin, operated the only European wireless transmitter powerful enough to reach North America in 1914. Germany also maintained a powerful wireless station at Sayville, New York, connecting to Nauen across the Atlantic. These stations became Germany's primary lifeline to the rest of the world. But wireless radio had a fatal flaw compared to submarine cables. Anyone could intercept it. When you send a message through an underwater cable, only the sender and receiver can access it. The copper wire is physically isolated under hundreds of feet of water. Intercepting a cable message requires physically tapping into the cable itself, a difficult and detectable operation. Wireless radio broadcasts in all directions. Every transmission can be heard by anyone with a receiver tuned to the right frequency. Messages sent from Nauen to Sayville passed through the airwaves over Britain,
and the British were listening. The real breakthrough came when Britain established what they called Room 40. Room 40 was the British Admiralty's cryptanalysis section, housed in the old Admiralty building in London. The official designation was 40 OB, Room 40, Old Building. It was led by Admiral William Hall, a man Winston Churchill called brilliant and ruthless and pitiless. Room 40's job was to intercept German wireless messages and break the codes. And thanks to Alert's cable-cutting operation, Germany was forced to send almost everything by wireless, making Room 40's job dramatically easier. Within days of the cables being cut, Room 40 began accumulating thousands of intercepted German messages. Diplomatic communications, military orders, naval movements, supply coordination, everything Germany transmitted by wireless radio was captured by British intercept stations positioned throughout Britain and the Empire. The Germans knew their wireless messages could be intercepted. They used ciphers and codes to protect sensitive information. But British code breakers got incredibly lucky early in the war. Russian naval forces recovered German naval code books from captured cruisers. The Russians shared one code book with Britain. Room 40 suddenly possessed the keys to reading German naval communications. However, the biggest intelligence coup was still years away. On January 16, 1917, Room 40 intercepted a German diplomatic message being transmitted via wireless to Nauen, then relayed through neutral Sweden's telegraphic link to the Americas, then finally sent through U.S. diplomatic cables to Mexico. The message was encrypted in German diplomatic code 0075. Room 40 decoded it and discovered something explosive. The message was from German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmerman to the German ambassador in Mexico. It proposed a military alliance between Germany and Mexico. If the United States entered the war on Britain's side, Germany would help Mexico reconquer Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, territory Mexico had lost to the United States in the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1847. This was the Zimmerman telegram, and it only existed because Alert had cut those German cables 3 years earlier.
The cable-cutting operation revealed something crucial about modern warfare. Information dominance could be more valuable than military force. Britain's all-red line network wasn't just a communication system, it was a weapon. By controlling the physical infrastructure of global telegraphy, Britain could read enemy communications, delay strategic messages, and feed disinformation to neutral countries. The cable network gave Britain what modern military theorists would call information superiority. Germany spent the entire war trying to overcome this disadvantage. They invested heavily in wireless technology, building more powerful transmitters and developing better codes. They attempted to cut British cables in retaliation, using submarines equipped with cable-cutting gear. German U-boat U-151 successfully cut cables connecting New York to Nova Scotia and Panama in 1918. But these operations were too little, too late. Britain's cable redundancy meant that cutting one cable just rerouted traffic through alternatives. The technical challenge of submarine cable warfare drove innovations on both sides. Cable ships developed better grappling equipment. Divers learned to work at greater depths. Cable armor improved to resist cutting attempts. By World War II, specialized midget submarines were designed specifically for cable-cutting operations, used by both the Japanese and Allied forces. But the real innovation wasn't technical. It was strategic. Britain had realized something that would define the next century of warfare. Control the communication infrastructure, control the narrative. Control the narrative, control the war.
This principle extends directly to modern conflicts. In 2022, when Russian forces invaded Ukraine, one of their first targets was Ukraine's telecommunications infrastructure. In 2013, reports emerged of submarine activity near undersea fiber optic cables in the Mediterranean. In 2024, the Red Sea subsea cable infrastructure suffered mysterious disruptions. Cable warfare never ended. It just evolved. Today, over 99% of international data travels through submarine fiber optic cables. Over 400 cables connect every continent, carrying emails, financial transactions, streaming video, military communications, and internet traffic. These modern cables are direct descendants of the telegraph cables Alert cut in 1914. And they're just as vulnerable. Modern cable ships use remotely operated vehicles and advanced sonar instead of grappling hooks. But the fundamental principle remains unchanged. If you know where a cable is, you can cut it. Modern cables are marked on international charts for repair purposes. That same information could guide hostile operations. The difference today is redundancy and capacity. In 1914, cutting 5 cables could isolate an entire country. In 2025, cutting 5 cables would barely be noticed because traffic would automatically reroute through dozens of alternatives. But cutting the right cables, in the right locations, at the right time, though, that could still cripple communications for entire regions. Alert's mission demonstrated that small-scale technical operations, executed at the right moment, could have strategic consequences far beyond their immediate tactical impact. 1 ship, 1 night, 5 cables. The ripple effects lasted 4 years and helped change which side won the war.
The story of CS Alert isn't just history, it's a template that's still being used today. In 2015, the USS Annapolis, a U.S. Navy submarine, was photographed near Russian undersea cables. In 2017, increased Russian submarine activity was detected near transatlantic data cables. In 2025, concerns about Chinese cable-laying ships operating near critical infrastructure dominated naval intelligence discussions. The underwater cable war that started in 1914 never ended. It just moved from telegraph to fiber optics. But Alert's mission teaches us something more important than just cables are vulnerable. It teaches us about the nature of modern conflict itself. The most effective attacks aren't always the most violent. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do to an enemy is isolate them. Cut them off from allies, from resources, from information. Make them communicate in ways you can intercept. Force them into disadvantageous positions without firing a single shot. That's what Britain did to Germany in August 1914. And Germany never recovered. Alert herself had a quieter ending than her famous mission. She was taken out of service in 1915, her cable handling gear removed and installed on a newer ship. She spent her final years as a merchant vessel under various names, the Lady Carmichael again, then Hobgoblin, then Northam. In 1932, she was wrecked on the South Training Wall at Redcar and scrapped. But the impact of her mission echoes through every modern conflict. Every time a military planner considers communication infrastructure as a target, every time intelligence services intercept enemy transmissions because secure cables aren't available, every time a nation invests in protecting their submarine cables from hostile action, Alert proved that the most powerful weapon isn't always the biggest gun. Sometimes it's a grappling hook, a cable cutter, and the knowledge of exactly where to use them.
The underwater cables beneath our oceans right now are carrying this video to you. They're carrying your messages, your data, your connections to the world. And they're just as vulnerable as the cables Alert cut 110 years ago. If you found this story fascinating, there's so much more to discover about how communication shaped warfare, how code breaking changed history, how the technical details of radio, cables, and ciphers determined which side won critical battles. Subscribe to see more stories about the engineering and problem-solving that changed military history. Not the battles themselves, but the technical innovations that made victory possible. Hit that like button if you never knew one ship could change the course of a war by cutting 5 cables. And comment below, what other communication innovations from military history should we explore next? The Enigma machine? The Navajo code talkers? Operation Mincemeat's deception networks? Next time, we'll look at how British engineers built a bridge under enemy fire in just 48 hours during the Normandy invasion, an engineering miracle that kept the Allied advance moving when conventional wisdom said it was impossible. Until then, remember, the most powerful victories are often won not with weapons, but with wire cutters.